As I mentioned before the show started, we have a guest joining us. Yeah, he joins us about once a month. Love when he's available to come on. Dr. Everett Piper. He is the author of that just simply fabulous book, Not a Daycare, the former president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He's an author. He's a columnist at Washington Times. He's just a man full of brilliant insights about America, a very dedicated Christian, often bringing the Christian, the biblical, scriptural perspective to the issues we face, but also just a great observer about America's culture and society. And I wanted to have, he comes on about once a month, love having him, and I want to talk about things he's been writing recently and also about the stories we just talked about. So, hello, Dr. Piper.
Thank you for having me on, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Love having you on. Well, you know what? I'm going to were you able to hear the first 5?
Yes, I listened to the whole thing.
Okay, so let me just start with, you were a president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University and had students who probably had a wide range of things you considered in their admission. What is your reaction just to start with, what is your reaction to the idea of the students at University of Pittsburgh who want to be able to tell the administration if they and their black-led student council deem someone racist, the university must remove that person, administrator or professor? What's your reaction to that?
It's a terrible idea. It's the opposite of what classical liberal education is supposed to be. You mentioned my second book, Not a Daycare. Well, my first book was actually titled Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas. Now, let me explain what my point was there. As a conservative, as somebody who believes in conserving the things that matter, a conservationist, if you will, I believe in conserving the time-tested truths that have served as the foundation for our free republic. I believe in self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. Among those things are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and purpose. I believe in conserving those things, but as a conservative, I'm really more classically liberal, if you will, than my left-of-center progressive counterparts, because a classical liberal believed in an education for liberty, academic freedom, if you will. And all these stories, every single story that you just rattled off right now, is an example of ideological fascism rather than academic freedom. You must submit, you must agree. If you don't bow at the altar of our ideological mindset, our closed and truncated worldview, we will expel you. We will not listen to you. We will not admit you. You will be verboten. You are unwelcome. You are a pariah. And that is not classical liberalism. It's the opposite of academic freedom. It's ideological fascism. And what every story that you just cited is grounded in is the total absence of what the Liberal Arts Academy is supposed to be in the first place.
I could not agree more. And the expression, I think you've used it, but I often use it about one of the just hallmarks of Western civilization is a robust debate of ideas. And if you're in college and you engage in some of these behaviors, you make demands, you think you're setting the rules, and you succeed at that, if your university capitulates to you, then what really ends up happening is you carry that as a life lesson. So you go out into the world and you face people in the workplace, in the political arena, in our culture, who are saying ideas that you don't like or holding values that you think are wrong. And you don't have the capacity to have a conversation, to engage. Your answer is the shutdown, cancel culture mindset that works so well for you in college. And I want to know what you think. Do you think that's part of what we're seeing in our culture today in America, our inability to have any conversations about important issues?
Oh, absolutely, Debbie. The couple quotes that I'll give you. One from a very nefarious individual, and that's Adolf Hitler. Hitler said, "Let me control the textbooks and I will control the state." Abraham Lincoln, and I'll give you the Piper paraphrase of Lincoln, said, "What's taught today in the schoolroom will be practiced tomorrow in society and culture." In other words, garbage in, garbage out. Good ideas, you're going to have good community, good culture, good government. You're going to have good kids. And bad ideas, you're going to bear the exact opposite fruit. Richard Weaver wrote his book in 1948. He titled it Ideas Have Consequences. And he basically was warning us of this circus that we're now seeing playing itself out in our streets, that when you teach terrible ideas in the classroom, you're going to see terrible consequences in our culture. And again, every story that you cited is an example of that. People can't just sit back and say, well, those are just egg-headed ideas that academics are discussing in the ivory tower. No, those ideas will bear fruit in your culture. And the proof is in the pudding. Just turn on the nightly news and you see the evidence of that in the riots in the street and the lack of freedom that we see being embraced in the ivory tower, as well as in culture in general.
Absolutely. We could probably talk about that. In fact, I think in other times we have spoken, we've been on these issues about colleges, and I think it is so, I would like very much for college campuses, college administrators, to begin to get the message from the broader culture in America. You're really hurting our country. You're indulging in one viewpoint only, and pretty much in most campuses it's a very radical leftist view, a socialist, communist, secular worldview, rejecting Judeo-Christian values. And actually, even if so they're producing a bunch of students who are ultimately going to not be able to function in our society. And I wish there'd be a vehicle for pressure to colleges to say, we need you to go back to what your term, classical liberalism, the openness to all ideas. And I mean, besides, go ahead.
There is a vehicle. It's called your pocketbook.
Yeah.
And the parents that are listening to your show right now, and the grandparents that are listening right now, I have one word of advice. Stop sending your kids off to these institutions that teach this pablum. Why in the world are you spending your money to send your kids off to these institutions that don't have any desire to even teach your kid how to honor academic freedom, how to have a good, healthy adult conversation where you disagree and you come to some conclusions because you were both interested in pursuing what was true rather than protecting your political agendas? Parents need to vote with their pocketbook, and if they would, you could put a stop to this nonsense.
I love that too. I could not agree more. It'd be a fabulous idea. These schools actually losing students and actually alumni who may have attended schools when they were more open-minded, more even-keeled, both sides being expressed. If those people, alumni, would just say, we're not writing checks anymore. We don't like that you teach this. We don't like that you don't allow this. That'd be another vehicle. But you have three great columns out I want to try to hit in our time today. And two of them relate to religion and to the church's role in our society. You had a piece that was in the Washington Times. And by the way, for our listeners, every article we're talking about is listed on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down, list of links. You can read these articles. Dr. Everett Piper, great thinker, great speaker, and great writer. So the one is called Welcome to the Neo-Marxist Church of Holy Wokeness. Okay, that's really funny. I like the title even. Welcome to the Neo-Marxist Church of Holy Wokeness. But you give examples, and I would just tell one example, and then we'll talk about what is happening to churches doing this. But at a Black Lives Matter protest in Cary, North Carolina, a white woman took the megaphone and repented on behalf of Caucasian people, she shouts, and calls upon the crowd to kneel before two black pastors seated before them on a park bench. And a church, similarly, a church in Atlanta, you had, unfortunately, Dan Cathy, CEO of Chick-fil-A, genuflecting before a black colleague while shining his shoes in a ritual atoning for collective shame of being white. Okay, so I'm gonna, what in the world is going on? I just would like to have you elaborate on that, and how do we get through to these churches? First of all, what's wrong with what those churches, let me start with that. What's wrong with what happened in that Atlanta church with Dan Cathy, the CEO of Chick-fil-A?
Well, what's wrong with it is I don't think you should be bowing before anybody but Christ. There was a time when that was a no-brainer, that we don't bow before a monument of anyone. In fact, I think there's a story in the Old Testament, isn't there, where Nebuchadnezzar actually asked people to do that, and we had a few folks that stood up and said no, and they were called, their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But today we see the evangelical church bowing, almost in a religious ceremony of confession and repentance to what? It's not Christ. It's not the God of the Bible. It's a politically correct God of Black Lives Matter. And the irony, and you know this, you've covered it on your show, Black Lives Matter is a neo-Marxist organization that stands for the dismantling of cisgender heteronormative thinking and the queering of the nuclear family. They say that on their website. So why in the world, why in the name of everything that's right and just and holy would the evangelical church stand up and in solidarity with an organization that seeks the very destruction of Christianity? This is suicidal. Narcissism is always suicidal. The story of Narcissus, gazing in the pool, slipping and falling in because he was infatuated with himself, a high view of self, is always suicidal. And the evangelical church seems to have a very high view of self and a very low view of Scripture, to the point where we can't even figure out it's wrong to bow to a political organization that has a Marxist ideology and seeks the very destruction of the church that we supposedly are there to defend and promote.
Love that. Dr. Piper, I don't know if you happened to see this video. I played it, I think, yesterday in this show, but there was a former NFL player who does, a former NFL player who does sports commentary, and he was actually doing commentary on the NBA's plan to paint Black Lives Matter on the floor of the upcoming NBA mini season. And his commentary was exactly what you just said. This is Marcellus Wiley, who brought out and was reading from the Black Lives Matter website, their own, what they stand for. And he said, you know, he was so grateful in his life. He was raised in a two-parent home with parents who cared for him and nurtured and taught him. He ran through statistics about what happens in single-parent households, how much harder it is for single parents and for kids growing up in single-parent homes to have their head on straight. And he talked about, why would you support an organization trying to destroy the nuclear family? It was a brilliant takedown. Did you happen to see that interview, by the way? Did you see that?
I haven't seen that one, but stop and think about the wisdom of what he just did. The African American family has been destroyed by politically correct progressive politics. In other words, who suffers disproportionately as the result of fatherless homes? African Americans do. We've got 60 to 70% of African American children that are born out of wedlock. In other words, they don't have a father. And we know that statistically, you don't even have to be a Christian to make this argument. Statistically, if there's no father in the home, you're going to have great dysfunction in that home, especially with young boys. If they don't have a father figure, they're going to grow up and they're going to be involved in some very illegal activities. They're going to basically perpetuate the cycle of violence, the cycle of poverty. So basically, when you see Black Lives Matter saying we want to dismantle the nuclear family and get rid of heteronormative, male-centered family structures, you just want to ask, well, how's that one working for you? It doesn't seem to be working out very well. You're basically going to damn these poor black kids to multiple generations of dysfunction if we keep going down this path.
Absolutely true. And, you know, it was really interesting. When you were finishing using the language, I believe was actually coming over similar to what's on the Black Lives Matter website. It's a bunch of the gobbledygook modern terms. They want to destroy the nuclear family. They want to say it's irrelevant. And this is what Marcellus Wiley was so good because, you know, he's a pretty, I mean, I'm not a big sports fan, but people who are a big sports fan, he's a big guy. I mean, he's a big name. He's a commentator. And laying that out, it was a beautiful thing. But I want to go back to why churches are doing this, because I think it's a little bit similar to what is happening in universities. There is so much, and people use the expression the Twitter mob, or I'm always saying the Democrat media mob, but there's so much pressure from leftism. Leftists are very organized in the way they attempt to manipulate society. And so college campuses, college administrators, churches, pastors, it's easier to salute to whatever the Black Lives Matter, the social justice warriors, the leftists are telling you must say. It's easier to salute and stay out of their crosshairs. That's the reason, I mean, that's my sense of why they salute. They don't actually think that the Black Lives Matter values that are laid out on their website are good for America, but it's just easier to surrender than and parrot and salute, do what they tell you, than to stand up for the values that you understand are true and right. And as a pastor especially, we're committed to sharing the gospel, to spreading the word of God. You are just cowering at fear of being maligned. What it seems like the church needs is a massive infusion of courage. What do you say to that?
Well, the church needs to grow a spine. There's no question. I agree with that. This progressive movement within evangelicalism, the emergent church, the affirming church, is more of a church of enablement rather than a church that's actually preaching the gospel and calling for confession and repentance. I mean, stop and think about the character of the evangelical church today. It's known more for supporting riots than it is for having a revival. It's a church that seems to be more interested in being politically correct than calling for the confession of its parishioners and calling for repentance. It's a church that seems to be preaching, well, you're born that way, rather than one that's calling for people to be born again. This is not the evangel. It's not the good news of the gospel. It's being dumbed down to political opinions and what's politically correct and politically expedient. And that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm at the point, Debbie, where I don't even call myself an evangelical anymore because I'm not too sure what the evangelical church actually believes. Does it believe in the creeds of the church, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed? Does it believe in the history of the church? Does it believe in the inerrancy of the word? Or is it going to deconstruct the Bible and then reconstruct it in an image that looks more like what they see in the mirror than what they read in the history, the tradition, and the actual words of the gospel?
Brilliant questions all. I want to turn to one last column that you wrote, but before I do that, you mentioned a few minutes ago about Nebuchadnezzar. You know, my husband and I do this Bible reading every morning, and it's just a great time of the morning, early morning kind of. And so we were on the story of Nebuchadnezzar last week, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it's so interesting because we had the same conversation. We kind of talk about the verses and our thoughts about them. It's the same conversation we had, my husband and I did, that we're having now. It's like was almost everyone in that time. It's easier to just salute to Nebuchadnezzar. Keep it out of the burning fiery furnace. Keep you out of the crosshairs of the Twitter mob, the leftist mob, the mob that will pile on you if you don't agree with the Black Lives Matter and they call you a racist. I mean, the temptation, the stories of temptation, submission to evil, or standing for what's right, they're as old as Nebuchadnezzar, as old as time. And yet they're the battles we're facing today. So I think that
George, I know you need to go here, but one last word for me. George Santayana said, those who don't learn the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat them. In other words, if you don't pay attention to history, you're going to repeat the same silly mistakes and the same foolishness over and over again. Thomas Sowell says that the interesting thing about the left is they seem to ignore the bad ideas that have been prevalent for centuries, and therefore they continue to make the same stupid mistakes over and over again because they keep doubling down on the insanity of the foolishness of the past.
Absolutely. Do you have time for one more discussion item, your article about Al Gore and the UN? I don't know.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so you had a great column, and this was in a different publication, Outline. Again, it's on our website. The title was Al Gore, UN Secretary General, and Other Elitists call for a great reset of the global economy. And I had not seen this story anywhere else, but while we're all diverted by the violence in the streets and coronavirus and COVID and all that, Al Gore and other elitists met, including the UN Secretary General, to talk about the next steps in the great economic reset, the global reset, where they're going to try to essentially work more harshly, forcibly to redistribute wealth in the world. And I want to just ask you, as you're a deep thinker, a theologian, I could imagine some Christian leaders saying, look, all they're really talking about is America's wealthy. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. We're supposed to share. We're supposed to give to the poor. So isn't this just on the grand scale following Christ's teaching of share, give to the poor, share with the poor, love your neighbor, or not? I mean, because I think this is a horrible idea, but don't you think there'd be Christians who would argue that this is just sharing? So what's wrong with this idea?
Because the Bible never tells you to submit to the government to do your sharing for you. The Bible tells you, as an individual Christian, to be selfless and to be sacrificial and to pay your tithe and to give your offerings. You, as an individual, are supposed to make those decisions for yourself. The Bible never tells you that the government is supposed to be making all those decisions for you. That's the huge difference between government largesse and relying on the government to be the distributor of justice and economic welfare, rather than you taking the responsibility as a believer to take care of your own family first, then take care of your church, and then be willing to help other people because God has blessed you with the ability to do so. Two antithetical worldviews. One relies on the government, the other relies on the individual in subservience and obedience to God to do your job as God has called you to do. And stop relying on the government to do it for you.
Wow, and there we go. Dr. Everett Piper, I enjoy every time we have the opportunity to speak together. Thank you so much for joining me today on America Can We Talk, and I look forward to next time. Wait. Are you still there? You have a podcast. Yep. Tell our listeners how to find your podcast.
Just go to my website. It's DREVERETTPIPER.com. So it's dreverettpiper.com. You can find my podcast which I do daily, Monday through Friday. It's called The Rebellion. And you can get it on SoundCloud or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Okay?
Thank you, sir, so much. Take care.
Blessings.
Okay, folks, I want to add one more point before I go to my next topic. What I was referring to, this article that he wrote relates to, was actually about the meeting of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is where all these leaders got together, while we're all diverted and talking about the latest rules about masks and contagion rates and all the stuff related to coronavirus. The leftists and the mindset of the leftists never ends. It never ends. They never stop. And so while we're dealing with issues in America, the World Economic Forum met many players and names whose names you would know, and they were essentially talking about the idea that they've got to move forward more stridently, more ardently with this massive forced redistribution of wealth throughout the world. And one of the things I want to mention that I think is uniquely important about America and wealth redistribution. America has been and is the most generous nation on earth by a landslide. By orders of magnitude, America has always been the most generous, both internally, Americans generous helping each other, and internationally, America helping other countries, whether it is through, because of immediate and radical circumstances like a hurricane or an earthquake or something, as well as regular aid to nations of all kinds who are impoverished. America already voluntarily engages in wealth redistribution. But a really important concept of this, and important to keep in mind, because I think it is tempting for people to say, well, this is just being generous. And I love Dr. Everett's point that, the Bible, the implication or the duty of the Bible is not elect people in government who will forcibly redistribute wealth. It is about a personal calling of each individual to be generous to their neighbors. But the problem with being involved with Al Gore and other people acting on behalf of America, speaking or representing America, not that he was representing America, but the point is this kind of conversation it causes people to lose sight of the reason America has the prosperity that it does. When you engage in this kind of globalist mindset that says everyone's going to sit down at the big table somewhere where we meet, and we're going to look at the big picture of the globe, and we're going to look at wealth here and poverty here and abundance here and misery here, and we're going to shift it all around. We're going to have it's more and more toward not just sending of aid and money, but it's a sense of who's in charge of how wealth is distributed. Who's in charge? Who decides? And so it's a sovereignty issue, because the concept they try to get around to is that nations are actually obligated by these international meetings when their representatives say, we'll do this, we'll send money here, we'll send money there. And it slowly chips away at sovereignty. But it's an even deeper issue about America, and that is this: America's prosperity, America's stability, America's place as a leader of freedom in the world is not a matter of happenstance. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It is entirely due to the founding ideas of America. It's entirely due to the concepts that gave rise to our country, the concepts that are rooted in the Declaration of Independence, the concepts within the Declaration that talk about individuals, each of us having rights from God because we were born, a sense of each of us having personal responsibility. We are blessed with the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and our version of happiness. These concepts, and then as they grew into a concept of the creation of the government and a constitution that protects individuals, that holds the individual as still someone whose rights are to be protected. The free market system that grew out of that, capitalism, free markets, entrepreneurship, the whole concept of the way we interact in life, the way we interact as a society. We don't get to adulthood, we don't finish high school or college and then get told by the government, you're going to go work here and you're going to work in this industry and you're going to go work over here and you're going to work in this industry and you're going to do this. You don't have a government orchestrating and creating the economy. The economy is created because individuals have gifts, talents, interests, abilities, and they pursue them, and they produce something of value that other people want, a service or a product somebody else wants. And everybody freely pursuing that, everybody living in freedom, is the reason for the abundance America has. And really at its core, it is the Judeo-Christian ideas in the founders' mindset, in the idea of the Declaration and of the Constitution, the very structure of America's very beginning, the Judeo-Christian principles of the idea of the right of the individual to live in freedom and to live and to make his own way, to live in personal freedom and personal responsibility. These ideas, over decades, not always perfectly implemented. Sometimes government interfered too much. Sometimes government needed to step in and break up monopolies. It is not a purely non-governmental thing, but the very ideas that founded America created the prosperity we have. You could take the physical geography of the United States of America, the physical, every bit of land that constitutes the United States of America, and if in the same time of history since our founding till today, this country, America, had been run by communists or even socialists, we would have the same misery, lack, and suffering that communism and socialism bring around the world. It's the ideas that is wrong. The idea of communism, the idea of socialism are wrong. They are evil. They deny the inherent freedom of the individual to live in freedom. The reason America has prosperity are the ideas. And if you had in America those kind of ideas, we wouldn't be the prosperous nation we are. We'd be just some other blob of dirt on a map someplace that did not have any particular rewards, any particular wealth, affluence, prosperity. We wouldn't have what we have. When you don't recognize that idea, and you think that, and you treat the world as though somehow, through just an amazing stroke of luck, America ended up with abundance, America has prosperity, and these other countries over here don't have it. And you think the only reason is pure luck, or other people would attribute even worse things, greed or theft or some bad concepts, you don't fight for those concepts. You don't fight for the ideas that brought America's prosperity and abundance to America. You abandon those ideas. You say, well, it doesn't really matter the ideas. We're just working at, trying to make things fair. So you abandon all the ideas that created America's prosperity instead of exporting the ideas that gave America prosperity to other countries that are struggling. Export America's concepts of the idea of the freedom of the individual, of free markets, capitalism, whatever word you want to use it, the freedom of the individual to function and live his life in freedom and work and dream and strive and be rewarded for the efforts. You keep a connection between hard work and reward. If you abandon those ideas and you just ignore them as though they are irrelevant, you will not be successful in spreading wealth. You will not be successful in making things fairer. And so what the people at the World Economic Forum, they are ignoring the reasons for America's prosperity. They're ignoring the reasons for the poverty in many places in the world. Let me make clear about something. I'm not saying every country that is poor because of bad governmental policies, but they're poor for a variety of historical reasons. They, for whatever historical reasons they had in terms of being a colony, in terms of not having the ideas that melded into their culture, the ideas of freedom and the rights of the individual. They have a history of ideas there that never got the country going. They have, sadly, in many countries, they have Islamic extremism dominating the country, and so that takes away all of the idea of the freedom of the individual and the rights of the individual, that those don't exist in Islamic extremist thinking. So the point is, if you just try to redistribute money, which is all the World Economic Forum is talking about, take some money from here and put it over there, some money from here and put it over there, you never solve the problem. You never solve the underlying problems that led to the poverty of other nations. We should, as Americans, and we do as Americans, we export not just that we are generous in all sorts of ways more than any country in the world. We tried through public efforts, through federal tax dollars, through countless foundations, private charities to help countries around the world. We've tried to help in poverty. We've tried to help sharing ideas about agriculture, how to make your agricultural system work better so you can grow more things. We've helped try to eradicate the spread of disease. We've tried to help people learn better health habits. America does a lot of good, and we should do a lot of good. And these are right ideas of America, to share the ideas of how free markets work, how freedom brings prosperity, how learning about agriculture so you can get more agriculture, more products produced from your land, to learn about to spread education, to spread healthcare access. We can do a lot of good things, but if you're just Al Gore sitting around at the World Economic Forum and you're just saying, we have a lot of money, they have too little, let's just take some of this money and put it over there, you're never fixing the problems that cause poverty in other countries. And even worse, you're denigrating, failing to acknowledge, failing to share with the world that the reason America has the prosperity it does is because of the ideas that created our entire country's system. Our political system, our economic system are all ideas rooted in the founding of America, and we should be exporting those, sharing those, not just handing off money at the assignment of some international organization. That's a long kind of thing I spun off on, but Dr. Everett Piper, I think, was getting at some of those ideas I just said. He was needing to get off and on to his next thing, but I think it's an important thing to think about when we talk about, because it's very easy, as he was talking about earlier, some evangelicals are kind of drawn into the idea, some Christian of all kinds, fundamentalists, Christian Protestant denominations have bought into the idea that our goal is just to salute to the pressure of the left, the Black Lives Matter, social justice warriors, send money all around the world, do whatever they tell us to do, and it is an unthinking submission to ideas that actually aren't rooted in the right and good ideas that will perpetuate and help other countries be lifted up by the ideas that have lifted America so well.